Hello and welcome to the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another great episode of the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles' podcast. I'm your host, Joanna, and today we have an amazing show lined up for you. But first, before we get started, I'd love to introduce to you our co-host and moderator for this episode, Heather Griffin, also known by her nom de plume, A. Lee Miller. She is a historian and author of the award-winning The Watcher series, picked up for a 17-book deal with Dream Edge Publishing. Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Fantastic. And without further ado, our guest today, his work has been featured in the National Galleries of Scotland. He is one of Scotland's leading portrait artists and has been the artist of choice for dignitaries such as Nicholas Sturgeon, as well as celebrities like Brian Cox, Alan Cummings, Ewan McGregor, and also has a charitable side, which he has donated much of his work to help the homeless and has started projects to help feed some people in the poorest communities. Welcome the hugely talented Mr. Gerard Burns. How are you today?
I'm good. Good to be here.
So let's start with the first question. Are the paintings in the background yours?
They are, but I feel like a bit of a fraud because you're actually interviewing a Scotsman who's in Spain at the moment. We have a house over near Cadiz in Andalusia. I have a studio here. I'm able to work here. So these paintings, the one you can see behind me, these reflect this environment. Lots of light, lots of sunshine, as opposed to the paintings which I'm known by, which very much reflect the environment back home in Scotland.
Who first inspired you to start painting and to become an artist in the first place?
Gosh, interesting question. I suppose there's an element of nature, nurture. I was a teacher for many years. I taught art. I was the head of an art department in Glasgow. And you look at kids coming through, and you in all cultures, certainly in Western culture, you will have this notion that some people are either inverted commas good at art or they're not. And what people mean by that is that they have a natural aptitude. For some kids, if it's a sporting situation, some kids will have a natural facility when you roll a ball in front of them. You know, so I was always gifted in terms of hand skills, really good hand-eye coordination from a very, very young age. I could draw. But to go back to my teaching analogy, I saw kids coming through at the age of maybe 10, 12, 13, who were better than I was at that age. But what they didn't have was the drive. And I suppose for it to become something special, you need both. You maybe need a bit of aptitude, natural aptitude to start with, but then it comes down to the 10,000 hours. I was driven to create, and in the early days, that basically just meant copying everything and anything that I could possibly get my hands on. And that basically led on, you get reinforcement, people respond to what you're making, so that drives you on. So in terms of where it started, it's difficult. It's just basically something that's always been with me. I've kind of always defined myself in terms of my art. And again, to be slightly crass, I was always the best in the class at painting, at art. And as I say, what that really meant was that my hand skills were naturally quite strong. But what happens after that, as I say, is that drive to go on and do something with the hand skills.
But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like you said, it's drive, and willingness to take the natural talent and then push that natural talent
Yep. Yeah,
forward.
for sure.
What other artists, I mean, do you have other artists that inspire you? Are there ones that, you know, that just kind of, it's like when you looked at them when you were younger, you said, I want to do that. Like for me, I can't draw more than a stick figure. But I love the pre-Raphaelites. I love Godward in particular. And I look at that, and in fact, I have one hanging on my wall, but I look at those and I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that.
This is a slight digression. Okay, I'll answer the question about the artists in a minute, but when I was a teacher, if I had £1 or $1 for every time I've heard someone say what you've just said, I can't draw a stick man, I'm completely hopeless. We used to do a thing in the class with the kids when they came in at first. So I'm a musician, and we had guitars in the department, and I would sit the kids down and I would say to them, okay, so this is the art department. We're going to teach you a bit about drawing and painting. We're going to teach you some hand skills. And I would go on and say to them, so for example, are there any musicians in the class? And a few hands would go up, and you would have one of them say, well, can anybody play guitar? And a few hands would go up, and I would give the guitar to someone who couldn't play. And I would say to them, play me a tune. And they would look at you and say, well, I can't play guitar. And you would say, well, what would you have to do to be able to play guitar? Well, someone would need to teach me how to hold it. Someone would need to teach me how to press the strings. And my answer to that would be, well, why do you think it's any easier to draw than it would be to learn to play guitar? It's the same. So if you teach art, and that's what we did when I was a teacher, if you teach art in that way, if you teach it in a matter of fact, the way you would learn to play a musical instrument, it was incredible, absolutely incredible. So there's a very small percentage of kids who would simply not have the spatial awareness, who would really struggle, maybe the same percentage who would be tone deaf. But the vast majority, if you teach it in that way, it was incredible what they were able to do. So there you are, it's not too late for you.
I mean, on that complete tangent, because I think that this is an interesting question too, is we're seeing a lot of art classes, music classes being pulled out of primary education, which I think is really, really tragic in a lot of ways. I mean, do you, I mean, obviously think that's necessary for development all around?
It's
like
essential.
what do?
It's essential. I worked in a very academic, it was a private school in the middle of Glasgow, a school called St Aloysius College, very, very academic based. And my appointment as principal teacher kind of coincided with a change in thinking about the way that we educated the kids, where it was understood that it's not about a sausage factory, it's not about the number of kids you get into medicine. What you're trying to do is to create rounded individuals. And if you neglect that side of a person's development, I think it has very serious, because it's an outlet. Creativity and the ability to engage creatively is an outlet for people. And if that's neglected, so you find people later in life coming back to try to re-engage with that. But if you can get that into primary and to secondary schools, the kids have then got the hand skills. They've got them the same way as they would if they learn to write or to do anything else. And then you've got a platform upon which to build.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Okay.
It's interesting that I know out here we have like an art class, like a drawing or painting class and a music class, but it sounds like when you were teaching, it was just art as an art form, and then the students got to kind of figure out, or you as a teacher got to figure out where they were kind of placed. It's an interesting way to approach learning.
So see, if you don't have the hand skills, I mean, again, let's go back to the musical analogy. If I was to ask you to write a piece of music for me, if you don't have the facility, how can you? So I would go to the other extreme, I ignored completely the creative element. That to me was not my job. My job was to give kids hand skills, to be a facilitator, to allow them to develop the skills, which then allowed them to develop their own creativity. Without the hand skills, you're whistling in the dark.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, you don't want to give them or stamp yourself too much on them. Let them decide what their creativity looks like. And it's really sad because I think you see a lot of people not hitting it until they go to university, where they're kind of free to kind of pursue those art classes, or their family sends them to art classes or creative writing or drama or dance or whatever it is outside of school, which I think it's so hard. And I feel like if you put that back, you would have a lot of kids kind of settle down, because at this point they're so drilled into the academic side. They have no outlet to get all that energy out and that creativity out.
And particularly during COVID times, you think, you know, I mean, we're kids. I know that my own grandchildren, my youngest granddaughter, really struggled. You know, I mean, the isolation, the separation from her friends. So these are outlets. People need ways to express frustration. Sport, obviously, is a really powerful way, but also the creative arts, music. The problem with all of these things is that my experience is that kids, I'm going to sound like an old man here, kids these days, they don't want to put in the hard graft. You know, acquiring the hand skills is tough. You need to work hard at it. You know, if you're learning to play the violin, it sounds terrible for a long time. If you're learning to draw, you don't really get, but it's amazing if you engage over and over and over again, how that eventually the penny drops, the hand-eye coordination comes together, and then it was quite amazing. You could see these kids just whoosh, they would just shoot off. Anyway, there you go. A wee digression for you.
One all the same, though. I mean, I think it's important to talk about the way that art kind of fuels everything, and especially during COVID, where you see a lot of people consuming more art as an escape, music and paintings and
movies,
reading and whatever, and not only doing that but diving into it themselves as a way to kind of cope.
Most of the artists who really truly inspire me are probably dead, long dead. People like my greatest hero, my absolute greatest hero, is the Spanish artist Velázquez. His work, that really dark, rich, a master of the paint itself. Scottish artist Henry Raeburn, and I tend to be drawn to paintings of people, not necessarily portraits as such, but paintings of people. Titian, Rembrandt, Vermeer, that intimacy. At art school, I had a difficult time at art school because, well, so-called figurative painting was very much not in vogue at Glasgow School of Art in the early 80s. So I was pushed, screaming and kicking, away from realism and towards abstract expressionism. And interestingly, I would have regarded that time as wasted time, but what that did, that experimentation, was it taught me about the surface of the canvas. So I began to look at artists like Robert Rauschenberg, the Spanish artist again, Anton Tapier, whose work, their work was very much about the surface. And it would be a surprise to people who know my work now to know that my final year degree show was totally abstract. I worked with sand on pieces of board, stained with gouged into. The experience at art school was a difficult one, and so far as when I came out of art school, it kind of almost knocked it out of me. I was exhausted with it, and I couldn't really see a path for myself with abstract expressionism. So it took quite a number of years afterwards for me to find my way back to my true home as a painter. As a boy, we're blessed in Glasgow with the most amazing art gallery, the Kelvin Grove Art Galleries. And I used to go, a strange kid, I would get the train into Glasgow and basically just wander through this amazing gallery, and just basically stand and spend hours in front of a lot of these Scottish artists, certainly pre-Raphaelites, but we had Rembrandts, with James Guthrie, all of these people, but all basically about people. Essentially, paintings where people were the focal point.
And I mean, I think you kind of already started into question 3.
Okay.
But
oh no.
But the I saw a quote by you that I thought was really interesting, and it made me think of it when you just with what you just said, that your goal is realism, but it's through increasingly abstract means that realism is attained.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you in kind of, I mean, obviously what it means to me is different, but I think that's a fascinating take. So,
this will sound maybe a bit odd, but all paintings, particularly realist paintings, are a lie. It's a lie. I'm organizing brush strokes and colors and tones in such a way as to make you believe. Now, you talked about the painting, the crossing at the very beginning. That's a perfect example. To make you believe that what you're looking at is a child on a horse in a winter's background. It's not. That's not what it is. It's blobs and squeaks and lines of paint arranged in such a way as to make you believe that. So as I say, maybe it's too strong a word, but it's a lie. So all painting is abstract. The very nature of actually making a mark on a piece of canvas is an abstract consideration. The fact that I ultimately choose to configure those brushstrokes in such a way as to convince you that it's a person's face or a hand or a horse is a decision that I've made as a painter. But the actual nature of the medium, to my mind, whether I'm putting the paint on loose or whether I'm putting it on in soft, almost watercolor glazes, it's an abstract process, and you have to understand. And I suppose that takes me back to what I was saying. So that understanding of the surface of the canvas, perhaps many what we might call amateur artists, they never get beyond the point of trying to make it look real. If you understand paint and if you look at it from the point of view of paint itself, that's going to happen for you. The realism is almost secondary, if that makes sense, to the understanding of the medium itself. I hope that wasn't too convoluted, but that's the way I think about it.
So was there ever a time that you wanted to quit painting? I mean, everybody has kind of the starving artist tale, or idea that everybody that is an artist is a starving artist. Did you find that true on your journey at all? Did you kind of run up against that, or just no?
Yeah, well, I suppose you're right. I did already kind of allude to that. When I left art school, I was really quite disillusioned. I found art school, full stop. People really wax lyrical about art school, particularly Glasgow art school, particularly in the 80s. I found it a very difficult experience. I found the claustrophobia. I found the constantly being under the eye of tutors, of fellow students. I found it really difficult. I found it impossible to resolve anything because I was always conscious of being judged. So when I came out of art school, I basically had it. And I was going to be a pop star. That was what I was going to do. We had a band. We signed a good record deal to A&M Records. And that was what I was going to do. Thankfully, looking back on it, that didn't happen. Lots of people I know who were a bit more successful in the music business ended up having quite a tough time of it. So I had probably 6 years out of art school where I literally, I mean, and remember I said to you that I defined myself through my art. It's almost inconceivable. I literally never made a mark on paper artistically. And it was only when I applied to do teachers training, when I started to go back into a classroom, and I began to pick up pencils with a view to teaching, that energy. And again, allow me just to digress just for a wee second. If you're a golfer, winning tournaments, getting a hole in one isn't enough to get you up every morning and make you hit that ball. There has to be something going on in the brain, that connection of the club with the ball that does something inside your head. And for me, as an artist, there's an endorphin without a shadow of a doubt. Now, as a writer, it must be the same for you. There's an endorphin. When I pick up a piece of charcoal or a brush and I put it onto any kind of surface, it was like a bomb going off in my head. So teaching was my way back into the love of the materials. And that was my way back in. And it was, honestly, it was an astonishing. I can remember it very clearly that, why did I stop? Why did I stop this? And then there was a kind of slow clawing back of the hand skills, and then trying to kind of find my voice. But certainly there was a period where I really decided, okay, that was a bad idea. Enough. I'm not doing this anymore.
And I wonder if that's not kind of something that almost needs to happen for everybody. You kind of need to hit that point where it's like, I'm not doing this anymore. And it's the coming back to it that really inspires kind of your love for what you did. So yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if that's not crucial almost in development, is to hit the thing where you throw it against the wall and say, I'm done.
I've had it.
Yeah,
for sure. Back. Or maybe not come back. I mean, and I suppose at that point, genuinely, I really thought, okay, I'm not going to come back to this.
Yeah, of course.
I think I've maybe had it. And I suppose, I hope the analogy there made sense, but there has to be something more. If you're a writer, it can't be about getting a book published. It's too hard. Mm-hmm. It's too difficult. So there has to be something else going on, and you have to be able to engage with the process, with the medium on that level, on that nuts and bolts level, before any of the rest of the stuff makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to love it. I mean, it's not about getting yourself published. It's about it's telling the story. In art, it's about telling the story that you're trying to tell. And in order to do that effectively, you have to absolutely love what you're working with. And so I think you're right. It's the difference is, like you said, the difference is you can't just be like, okay, I'm going to do it just because I want to be a famous golfer. No. You have to go out there because you're doing it, and it's the first thing you want to do, and it's the thing that makes you happiest.
For sure. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So your Scottish ancestry, Scot as you are in Spain. So it obviously plays a major role in your work. I mean, it shows up quite a bit. What is it that you love most about the Homeland?
Gosh, there's a hard question. So in terms of my Scottish ancestry, I am Irish Catholic. Great grandparent came over, we think maybe possibly on the run, settled in Scotland. So 3 generations of Scots, and I've known nothing else. So I think in my painting, I reflect the environment in which I live. I despair to an extent. There are lots of Scottish artists who paint with lots of bright colours. To go back to, again, you were saying about the crossing. In Scotland, we live in a tonal landscape. Okay, in the summer, I mean, up towards the islands in Scotland, it can be sparkling, it can be beautiful. But in the cities, in the central belt in Scotland, at this time of year, right through, we live in a tonal environment. It wasn't obvious to me that I was reflecting my environment until I had my first exhibition in London. And I went down for the opening night and spent the whole night being told, gosh, these Celtic faces, these Scottish colours, to me, they weren't. They were just the colours that I know. I remember there's a whole series of paintings, lots of different elements to my work, but there's a series of paintings where I've painted the city of Glasgow, particularly in the rain.
Oh yeah, I saw that one.
And lots of people in the early days, my dad in particular, would say to me, who on earth is ever going to buy a painting of Glasgow in the rain? You know, who would do that? And my attitude was, well, but that's what we see. You know, people talk about, you know, that the pavements go black in the rain. For me, in Glasgow in the winter, when it's wet, you've got light from above and below. So there's this magic about the city for me in the winter. So I suppose I haven't chosen to reflect my environment as such. I just don't know anything else. And when I come to Spain, as I say, these things on the wall behind me, these are a bit of a distraction, but this is not who I am as an artist. The one element, I suppose, which is has become synonymous with my work is the saltire, the Scottish flag. The painting, which is probably the most famous, is a painting called the Rowan, which I painted, 20 odd years ago. And I'm asked, why the saltire? Why have you painted the saltire? At that point, the answer was very simply because I'm Scottish. Everywhere I went in the world, when I saw the flag, it would jump out at me. And as an artist, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that thing that repeats over and over, and you think, I'm going to do something with that. The saltire has come front and centre of what I do. The saltire paintings are synonymous with the push for independence, principally because the former First Minister, Alex Salmond, had the Rowan on the wall on his office the whole time he was First Minister. So it was photographed and filmed 1,000 times. In fact, my wife and I, we were in China and we saw it on the telly. I mean, just brilliant, because he was being interviewed in front of the painting. So that's a specific element in the work, which came into my work for a specific reason. But generally speaking, my work, it simply reflects the environment in which I live. It's to see the paintings in the flesh. I mean, this is the single biggest issue for me. Even people who go onto my website, and I've tried really hard, there are lots of videos on the website, so to try and allow you to get some sense of the surface, to get up close. And again, it's interesting you mentioned the crossing right at the very beginning. That painting sold a week ago. It's a really huge piece. It's to go into a house in Glasgow, a new house which is being renovated. And the couple had seen it online. And as they walked in the door, they were just, wow, this thing. And I think if nothing, so the elements that we're discussing here, the saltire, the children, handled in another way, these elements could be twee. They could be superficial, but I hope that in what I do, that all of the paintings, there's a gravitas, that there's a pathos about the work. In the children, I always try to look at that interior world. So again, the children are not intended to be painted in a kind of a superficial way. There's arguably maybe a bit of darkness about it, you know, the combination of children with the wolves, the child in a forest, all of these elements, they kind of lend a wee bit of an intrigue to the thing.
But what else would you like people to know, I think maybe about the Saltire collection in general?
So they started, and at the point where I made the first painting, my youngest son, Patrick, who's now 28, is the boy in the painting. And that's another thing I should point out, that All of the subjects in my painting, I don't make anything up. These are my children, my grandchildren. I've painted my boys from they were babies, virtually right through to their young men. The saltires, I went on a journey politically. I would say when I painted first of the saltire paintings, the Rowan, the point where Alex Salmond asked if he could have that in his office, and there's another big story about how it ended up there, but he asked if he could have the painting in his office. And I had to say to him at that point, look, I don't think I vote for you, because I wasn't really particularly pro-independence. I was probably relatively apolitical actually at that point. So these paintings took on quite a specific, quite an overtly political resonance, and irrespective of what side of the argument you are on in terms of Scottish independence, these paintings are synonymous with that time. There's absolutely there's no getting away from it, to the extent that people basically took some of my paintings and they stuck a Union Jack on them rather than the saltire. So in order to reverse engineer something, the original has to be quite embedded. So to me, that's an indication of just how synonymous these saltire paintings are or were with that period in Scottish history.
So the Mythology Collection is also fantastic. Like I said, obviously Godward was one of my favorites, so that shouldn't be a surprise. The Mythology Collection is awesome, because that's kind of what he painted for the most part.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite in that series, and kind of what inspired you to do that series in general?
A lot of my paintings will come in 2 or 3 different ways. One of the ways that they come is that they arrive fully formed in my head. I can see the painting before I even make a mark on the canvas. Often, the other way that they come is that I'll read something, or something will be pointed out to me. And when I was a teacher, I was lucky enough to work with a brilliant classical scholar who opened up classical Greek mythology to me. And I suppose I wasn't really that interested in the mythology element of it. To me, it's always the human element of these stories. The Greeks used mythology, they used the gods as a way of explaining things that they didn't understand about the world in which they lived. They used these stories to explain volcanoes and floods and spring and summer and everything else. So that was my engagement with it. And actually, I found that a lot of the stories, they resonated just as powerfully now as they would have then. There is one theme which has really stuck with me over many, many years, and that's the theme of Persephone. There's quite a dark myth associated with Persephone, depending again on how you look at it. Persephone was the daughter of one of the most powerful female goddesses, the goddess of the natural world. She was out collecting flowers, and she was abducted by her uncle, the god of the underworld, Hades. Another way of saying that is she died. Now, her mother basically flew into a rage and into despair because this had happened, and she laid waste to the natural world. So the rest of the gods, brilliant story, the rest of the gods got together and they decided, okay, we need to do something about this because the world is in desolation. The world's being destroyed. So they organized a truce. They organized a compromise where basically Persephone was allowed to stay with her new husband down in the underworld for 6 months of the year. So when she came back to the living world in springtime, her mother rejoiced. And you had growth, and you had spring, and you had summer. And when she had to go back to the underworld, her mother once again plunged into despair, and you had winter. And I thought that story just stayed with me, such an amazing way to make sense. You can imagine, that story making sense of why the seasons changed. So I've taken that story and I've painted Persephone, dozens of times. a couple of really big canvases which depict the abduction, which I've almost depicted as an embrace, that basically this young woman being taken down into the underworlds. And I've also painted Persephone almost the way Gustav Klimt would have used pattern and realism. I think my take on Greek mythology, at times people have looked at these things and they've been confused by my take, because I don't really allow myself to be bound by what has gone before. If I understand something by the story, I'm quite happy to interpret it, to reinterpret it in a different way, often with contemporary clothing, which changes the nature of the way the story is received. And I suppose could I lead on and maybe say this leads on into my religious works. Similarly, I've taken a number of really, really central religious themes: the theme of the cross, the theme of the Passion, and I have depicted those stories. I've placed these stories in contemporary Glasgow. Take away the beards and the flowing robes from these stories, the context changes profoundly. There's no romance. And I think, again, so you take these well-known stories and you change the way that they're presented, and it makes people look at them in a different way. Okay.
So we've got a couple of minutes left here, maybe enough for
Okay.
questions, but in mentioning that, how would you like your work to be remembered by the world?
Gosh, I don't worry too much about legacy. I'm too much in the middle of it. I regard myself, we've just published a book about my work, and there's been lots of conversation about it, and I really just regard myself to be not quite at the start of this, but the journey still has a long way to go. So legacy is for other people to decide when I'm long gone. I'm quite happy just to be in the thick of it and still engaged, still enthusiastic enough to get up and do it every day.
Kind of a final question, because I think that is a good lead in for it, because I'm actually curious as to how other people deal with this. Running out of inspiration, kind of, or hitting that block, right? How do you break that? Do you ever run into that?
Okay, so I got great advice many years ago, and I don't know how this will translate, but one guy said to me, don't wait for inspiration. I mean, he wasn't an artist, he ran a business. He said, just go to your work. Just go to your work. Go to the studio and sweep up, move things around, sit and listen to some music, have a cup of tea. And I've found that at points where I feel as if I'm running dry, if I follow that advice and I just go to the space, I don't wait for the muse to strike. I just be in the space. And it's amazing how something out of the corner of my eye, something will just occur to me, and I'll think, oh, I'm going to look at that. And down it comes, and I'll work on that for a while. And I also am constantly scanning. The sketchbooks are more notebooks. They are squiggle books, constantly full of something like the saltire all those years ago, which has occurred to me. So I don't worry about it. And I suppose, to be really brutal, if it ever came to the point where I had nothing left to say, then fair enough. You know, take a break again. Those 6 years we spoke about, you know, hang up your brushes for a while. And if it comes back, it comes back. And if it doesn't, I won't be able to pay the mortgage for a while, which would be a problem. You know, but I try not to worry too much about it. I just, it's either there or it's not. And that takes us back to what we were saying about that endorphin thing. Mm-hmm. So that if you're engaging with the process, if this is genuinely where you're meant to be in life, if that's your calling, if we want to use that expression, then actually engaging with the process is what it's about. It's not about the next idea. It's not about the end product. It's about the actual engagement with the process, and that's where I get my thrills. It sounds a bit sad, standing alone in a studio in rags most of the time, But that's what does it for me.
Thank you both so much for taking the time out to talk with us today. Gerard, is there a website or something that people could go to find your work, to see if you, I mean, I would say anything coming up, but COVID.
Yeah, there's lots. Yeah, there's still lots going on. My name, Gerard M. Burns. M for Matthew. There's a huge website, gerardmburns.com. You'll find loads and loads of work which is for sale, but also there's a real an archive there of video and past works and plenty to look at. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Ailey, thank you so much for being our guest moderator today. You guys have a fantastic day. And thank you all so much for listening and watching the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles' podcast. We hope that you enjoyed this wonderful session. We look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.